Iman Gadzhi built over $100 million empire all through organic YouTube content, selling through all sorts of ways. Soft CTAs, live events, entire YouTube channel dedicated to one offer. But all of this wouldn't work half as good if he wouldn't already have built massive trust, connection and social proof through his content. And you might be thinking that he does that by giving loads and loads of value through his content, but this is only a fraction of the equation. And you know, I thought that too, until I spent hours dissecting his content to find out why his content performs so much better than the competition. And what I found is that the main lever he uses to influence you into buying from him is his storytelling. So in this video, I'm gonna break down everything. What psychological tactic he uses to build trust, connection and authority better and faster than everybody else, why his videos feel so convincing and his arguments undeniable, and how he literally manipulates you into buying from him. Okay, before we get into how exactly Iman uses specific storytelling techniques to make you buy, we need to understand the first and probably the most powerful psychological lever he pulls, narrative world building. And this is a super important concept because it's the foundation of Iman's scripts, the bedrock everything is built on. Here's the thing, movies, books, religion, politics, cultures, brands, none of them spread because of information or logic, they spread because they create a reality you can step into. And researchers at Ohio State University ran a study on this that shows how deep this really goes. Here's what they found. When someone becomes fully immersed in a narrative world, two things happen almost instantly. First, your critical thinking shuts down. So the part of your brain that normally evaluates claims or checks for inconsistencies goes quiet. And second, your skepticism collapses. Participants who were deeply transported became significantly more likely to accept the storyteller's worldview, even if it contradicted facts they already knew. And here's the interesting part. It works even if you know someone is trying to influence you. In the study, some participants were told upfront that the story is designed to persuade them. It didn't matter. The moment they got pulled into the narrative, the resistance disappeared anyway. But the real question is, how exactly does Iman build this narrative world through his content? Well, it's very simple. He defies your current worldview and then imposes his by explaining why it's so much better time and time again. He repeats the same narrative architecture in every single video with the same values.
Nothing in life is easy. I want to make that very clear. At this point, I've worked extremely hard, yes, of course. There is no such thing as get rich quick. There's no such thing as get rich easy.
The same backstory.
And I can tell you this from firsthand experience. I made my first $1 million at the age of 18 and have multiplied it every single year since then.
The same enemy.
Question, don't let anyone, the whole hustle culture thing, like try to shame you for asking this question.
For that beginning stage, I had to just focus. That new hobby I wanted to learn? No. Oh, coffee catch-ups with friends? No. Watching some new Netflix TV show? No.
And the same moral framing.
But I am gonna keep it very real with you. That is complete bullshit.
Watching self-help podcasts, thinking that maybe if you just watch one more, that maybe you'll finally be successful. That is absolute bullshit.
And because he tackles these elements time and time again from different angles, in different stories, in different emotional tones, the viewer's brain starts to treat them not as his opinions, but as the rules of the universe they stepped into. He doesn't give you isolated stories, he gives you a worldview that is consistent in every single video. And once the viewer accepts that worldview, selling to them becomes already so much easier, because they will feel like they need to get into the same world as Iman, which they can do by buying his products. But this is only the tip of the iceberg of how genius Iman's scripts really are. Okay, next we need to talk about probably the biggest differentiator between Iman's and all the other content out there. Because it's not what he teaches that makes his content so persuasive. There are a million other people who teach the exact same thing, maybe even better. But what separates him from everybody else is how he teaches. Because while everybody else is lecturing, listing benefits, or explaining frameworks like teachers, Iman teaches the way philosophers and writers have taught for thousands of years. Here's how most infopreneurs teach. They give value by explaining the benefits. They try to convince the viewer by listing outcomes. They break things down logically. They say things like, here are the top 5 reasons why this works, or here is this framework and why this matters. But if you look at some of the greatest minds in history, nobody taught through pure logic, they all taught through stories and metaphors. If you look at Plato, for example, he could have just written academic papers about his ideas, but instead he taught allegories. Or as another example, George Orwell could have just written an essay about totalitarianism, but instead he wrote 1984, and Iman utilizes the same exact principle for his educational content. Instead of telling you what you should do and then explain you why you should do it, he flips the entire teaching sequence on its head. Every point begins with a story, a metaphor, or a relatable example, something that shows you why it is so important and why you should do it.
And here's how you're gonna do this. Picture this. John works a low-level 9 to 5. He makes $20,000 a year. Now he learns copywriting. It takes him a few months, but now he's on pace to make $70,000 a year. And then he learns how to hire and delegate and manage a team. And now he's making $140,000 a year. And I could keep going on and on about skill stacking until he's worth hundreds of millions of dollars.
Third rule, which is you have to use specialized tools rather than generalized tools. Let's say you've been presented this beautiful, well-seasoned steak right in front of you, and you need to cut into it. Now, instead of being given a chef's knife, you've been given a butter knife. It's an absolute hassle and a struggle. You're gonna get it done, but you won't do it very easily. Now, with that same steak, if you went ahead and used the chef's knife, you'll do it with one clean slice through.
And what this storytelling technique does is that it not only makes his content stand out and way more engaging to watch, but it also favors emotional connection with the viewer, which builds trust and therefore makes the viewer more likely to buy. Another very important storytelling technique Iman uses all the time is to use imagery to explain his points.
It's like loading into a Fortnite map and running around without a plan on where to gather some loot and hoping to somehow just win the match.
It would take your pilot about 5 minutes to take off and get you to cruising altitude. Now with many hours to go, the pilot might check his gauges, and there, he's gonna notice that he's actually burned through 25% of his fuel in just the first few minutes of the journey.
Listen, making this mistake is kind of like trying to start playing a new video game in the hardest difficulty instead of working your way up.
When using such imagery, something really interesting happens psychologically, because imagery doesn't just make the point clearer. It taps into one of the strongest cognitive biases humans have, the familiarity bias. And studies going back to the 1960s consistently show that people trust, like, and agree more with messages they feel familiar. The viewer's brain feels like it already knows him, because the language he uses connects to moments or objects it is already familiar with. And you've guessed it, the more familiar you seem with Iman, the more you trust him and the more likely you are to buy from him. Now all of that, the imagery, the metaphors and the stories, this is what pulls you into each point of the body. But once you're inside, Iman does something even more powerful. And this is why his videos feel so addictive, why you keep watching and why so many viewers end up buying from him. That brings us to one of the most manipulative and effective parts of his storytelling playbook. Attention gaps and scarcity. Attention gap is the psychological space between where you are and where you want to be. And humans are biologically wired to hate that gap. The moment we become aware of it, our brain becomes desperate to try to close it. This is why every big movie drags out the moment just before the big reveal. It's why cliffhangers work. And it's why marketing frameworks like PAS or IADA exist in the first place. It's because tension is the engine of action. And the way Iman uses tension gaps is actually genius, because he doesn't just create open loops. He paints the outcome as something incredibly achievable if you have the right guidance. He frames the gap between where you are and where you want to be as much smaller than it actually feels like.
Which then equates to 33,000 views on your videos across multiple videos across the entire year. That's not really an unachievable figure at all. You only need a few thousand followers to make you kind of money. The premise here is very simple. There's people less capable, less knowledgeable than you, making far more money than you. Why? Because it does not matter how skilled you are or how much work you put in. And then you just package it up and put it for sale. And at that point, it's very hard for it not to work.
Essentially what he does is that he's reframing the path as a knowledge problem instead of a capability problem. Because when you reduce the perceived difficulty and amplify the viewer's sense of possibility, you create the illusion that the only reason they haven't succeeded yet is because they haven't learned his method. And the viewer starts to believe, if I only get this missing piece, his tool, his framework, his course, then success becomes basically inevitable. But in addition to the constant tension gaps Iman opens, he layers something even more primal on top of it: time scarcity. He constantly frames his ideas as part of a window that's closing, making it seem like if you don't act now, it's gonna be too late.
And I'm gonna be honest with you, if you miss this window, you will spend the next decade watching other people live the life that you could have had.
Honestly, you have no time to waste.
You may have missed the boat on that, but please don't miss the boat on this.
Time scarcity is one of the most powerful persuasion triggers in psychology because it activates the fear of irreversible loss. And the human brain is actually twice as motivated to avoid a loss than to pursue a gain. You know, I fall for this all the time as well when there's like a countdown or limited spots, but Iman does it in an even more sophisticated way. He makes your future identity the thing that's running out of time. He isn't saying buy now or this offer will be gone. He is saying if you don't act now, you'll become the kind of person that had a chance but didn't took it. And once that fear kicks in, the viewer stops evaluating options logically because they don't want to get left behind. Okay, but let's zoom out for a second. Because when you add all of this together, the narrative world, the metaphors, the imagery, the tension gaps, you start to see just how engineered his videos actually are. But there is one piece that creators almost always miss. A piece Iman implements so subtly most viewers don't even notice it happening. And yet, it's the part that imposes his authority more than anything else. And that's incorporating social proof. Because the moment most people try to show social proof or talk about their successes, it comes off as bragging, insecure, or straight up desperate. But authority is one of the strongest psychological levers in buying decisions, because the brain is wired to shortcut uncertainty. When people don't fully understand something, they instinctively look for someone who seems to know the path. In psychology, this is called heuristic trust. Because once the viewer sees Iman as the authority, the resistance disappears. His advice feels safer, his opinion feels smarter, and his offers feel low risk. But as I said, most creators stop the story and break the emotional momentum. All this to start listing achievements nobody asked for. But what Iman does is that he waves social proof into his storytelling so naturally you don't even register it.
I'm gonna compare 5 different business models. And by the way, this is speaking from experience. Not a, hey, well, I think this one's harder, or I think this, like, by the way, coming from someone who's made $1 million in profit with every single one of these models. Literally every single one of them. And some of these models I've made up to $100 million from. So like, trust me, I know what I'm talking about when I speak about this. And by the way, this is so serious that at WAP, which is a company I'm a co-owner in, where people earned almost $200 million on our platform in the last 30 days. 200 million a month.
Right now we're at trailing L30 GMV is 176.
We just rolled out a payments feature that makes this model even easier. And as time goes on, you can put more risks into these businesses. These days, I'm taking very, very big risks in terms of my capital, in terms of how much money I'm investing in businesses. That's really what I've been doing the majority of last year in my free time, is just buying up a lot of companies.
If you look closely at these examples, you'll notice that Iman relies on 2 super simple storytelling techniques that makes his social proof very subtle and blended with the story. And the first one is to first share vulnerability and then results. He'll begin with a failure, a mistake, a moment where he didn't know what he was doing. And then he quietly reveals the result he achieved afterwards.
There's issues all the time, you know, even just yesterday. Listen, it wasn't a massive order, it was only about 1,000 units. So those 1,000 units of one of our SKUs at the eyewear company, whatever, that's 125 grand worth of sales or stock. So it's a very small part of our order. But anyways, in the production, there was some discoloration. For us, that's not acceptable. We're never gonna sell that to our customers. So there we go. Now I'm set back 2 to 3 months on that specific SKU. So it is scalable, but you can, you know, anytime you're making anything tangible, there can be a lot of issues involved.
And what this does to the viewer psychologically is that he'll emphasize with him first, and then the results doesn't come across as bragging. It comes across as a continuation of the same honest story. The second technique uses all the time is what I call achievement as argument. Instead of saying, here's what I've done, he frames his accomplishments as context for why his point is true. Something he does all the time is show you what business decisions he makes, but then explains you why you should not do it, because he has a lot more resources and experience.
And they're not factoring in the number one thing. Anytime you have any subscription business, by the way, all my businesses now are subscription businesses. I have multiple software companies. I actually have a mobile app that is a low ticket monthly subscription. And to me, the funniest thing that people don't factor in is churn.
So these are the core storytelling techniques Iman uses all the time in his content: narrative words, metaphors, tension gaps, and authority. But there's one factor that multiplies all of this by 10, and most creators completely overlook it. And that's his production quality. The lighting, the pacing of the cuts, the b-roll, the sound design, the music. All of this is designed to make you feel the story he's telling, not just understand it intellectually. And that's why his storytelling hits 10 times harder than an average infopreneur's talking head video. Because Iman creates a visual experience on top of the story. I mean, if you look at his videos, they are like movie production quality. That's why the frameworks you've learned in this video become exponentially more powerful when paired with strong visual editing. Because good video editing doesn't make your video look better, it makes your storytelling stick. Okay, that's all I have for this one. This is how Iman Gadzhi uses storytelling to basically manipulate your buying decisions. But right now you have 2 choices. Either you take the concepts you've learned in this video and apply it to your content yourself, and don't get me wrong, you'll probably get it right over time and get incredible results in like 6 months to a year. Or you can let me handle all of the production of your videos, so ideating, scripting, editing, thumbnails, and not only being guaranteed results, but also saving a ton of time you can focus on growing your business. So if the second option is something you would consider, you can apply with the first link in the description to see if we would be a great fit to work together. And by the way, I don't take on many people because I want to work closely with my clients myself to guarantee the best results. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video and I'll see you in the next one.